So, sorry this is late, but it's time that we talk about the Prophet Taker and what all Limbo can do against her. I've been holding off on doing this video because the boss has a few bugs and weird issues related to her and the ads around her that hit Limbo especially hard, but after a 3-week wait, the new patch finally came out and none of those issues were fixed, so it's time to just sit down and give as much of a guide as I can. While those issues are rather problematic for Limbo, especially when talking about his viability as a teammate, there are still some minor ways in which he can contribute to a team, and his ability to survive here makes it so that he can fairly comfortably solo the boss if he feels like it without too many issues. So if you're curious about what Limbo can do against this giant rhyming robot, stay tuned and we'll break down the Prophet Taker. Now, normally for a video like this, I'd start by going over the mod setup that I'd suggest for this fight. However, the boss still has some issues that greatly affect what mods you'll want to bring here, so I'm going to change things up a bit. In a moment I'll list off a core mod set that I highly suggest for staying alive, but I'm going to leave a few slots blank for the time being. Later in this video I'll explain how useful duration and range currently are and how useful they could be if bugs were fixed, and then let you decide for yourself whether you want to fill those slots with either stat or just add in more things that increase your ability to stay alive. Anyways, probably the most important mod for Limbo here is Rolling Guard. If you don't have this, I highly suggest you try and get it because this is one of the best places to use it in the game. The boss has some pretty set periods in which you can do damage to her, which normally can be blown through in just a few seconds, and the rest of the time you'll probably want to be in the rift where the only things she can hit you with are her enormous feet. And there's another reason to have it. You see, the rest of the durability mods I suggest are just the usual combo of Pain Threshold, Hunter Adrenaline, one of the flows, Vitality, and Quick Thinking. And the last is very important to keep in mind, because there's currently a major bug with it that tends to rear its head quite often during this fight. You see, while the Prophet Taker and most of the ads that show up here treat Quick Thinking normally, the Terra Mancurs have the ability to simply ignore that mod at higher levels, which means they can two-shot you. I'm not 100% sure this is a bug as it only applies to higher level Mancurs like the ones you'll be running into in this fight, but if it isn't a bug, it is a really unusual design decision, and either way you need to be aware of it. Anyways, they move slowly, they can't hit you in the rift, they can't kill you through Rolling Guard, and they can be nuked down relatively quickly, so Quick Thinking is probably worth it as it can still save you from just about anything else that might hit you during this fight, but yeah, be aware of these guys and try and deal with them whenever you can. Anyways, those mods are what I consider Limbo's core here. There's still 3 main mod slots left, but we'll get back to them in a minute after we talk about the fight itself. As for weaponry, I suggest you take burst damage weapons with good range, as well as the Redeemer Prime if you've got it. That gunblade can do a lot of damage rather fast and from a good range, and is pretty much the best melee weapon you can take into this fight. If you don't have it though, you should take something that you're comfortable with and use it to heal up off of ads whenever you get low on health, rather than trying to use it against the boss. While you can damage the Prophet Taker with normal melee weapons, even if you go full durability, Limbo's a bit squishy for me to suggest you just jump on her legs and try to cut into them the way some frames can. And you will also need a heavy weapon setup for this fight. And for Limbo, I'm actually going to suggest the Imperator Vandal rather than the Velocitus that everyone else will probably tell you to go with. You see, while the Velocitus has good range if you can deal with its projectile's travel time, it generally takes 2 hits to destroy a limb even if there are no amps on the team, and usually doesn't need to reload during the armor phase if you can land all your shots. It crowd controls you after every fully charged shots and has a lower DPS than some of the other options. Meanwhile, the Imperator Vandal has much less damage per shot and is best used from relatively close, but its DPS and crit chance is so high that it can easily blow through a limb in under Rolling Guard's 3 seconds of invulnerability, and it does not crowd control you at all, so you can safely break at least 1 limb before jumping back into the rift. In addition, if you've positioned yourself correctly, you can sometimes go on small rampages and even tear through all 4 limbs in the body before needing to step back into the void. So yeah, since Limbo can safely get in and out of danger at close range here, and since staying still can be very dangerous for him, the Imperator Vandal just ends up being the better option overall. That said, which Arcwing weapon you bring here isn't that big of a deal, and you can even solo the boss with the dual Decurions or the Sengus if you actually feel like it. The only thing that I can say you absolutely need to equip here is, well, your Arcwing launcher, and radiation damage to take advantage of that 75% damage amp against the limbs. Alright, now that we're done talking about the weapons and basic builds, it's time to talk about the Prophet Taker fight itself. And let's just go ahead and say, Limbo does not directly help kill the Prophet Taker. This doesn't mean he's useless, but just that he doesn't have a damage amp that can help in any way. What he does have that could be useful here is massive crowd control and the ability to make Warframes with exalted weapons be able to safely target the boss's shields and clear ads. Or at least you would if certain issues were fixed. Yeah, I hate having to keep bringing this up, but Limbo's got some weird problems here. First up, while Titania, Excalibur, and the other exalted weapon users can be rifted and yet still deal damage to the boss's shields during the appropriate elemental phases, as well as clear ads during the other periods, they can sometimes hit a bug here that stops them from being able to harm the boss with their exalted weapons. I don't know what triggers this, and it doesn't always happen, but when it does, it's obviously a major problem. This is especially unfortunate for Titania, as all of the ads allow her to charge up Razorwing Blitz quite easily, and both her pistols and her sword can be used against the boss while she's in the rift. And that means she can safely access great sources of slash and puncture damage, as well as good sources of impact and a massive amount of 4 more elements while remaining completely invulnerable. But when this bug happens, she immediately becomes nothing more than a crowd clearer, and there's a lot of other frames that can handle that role far better. That said, it usually goes back to normal when the shield resets, so it's not a huge deal. It just happens often enough to be annoying, especially since the frames with ranged exalted weapons that can hit the boss don't tend to be particularly amazing at crowd clearing, and are usually squishy enough that you don't want them to step out of the rift much. As for the other issue, I'm actually not sure if it's a bug or if it's a feature that is directly aimed at preventing Limbo's CC from being as useful as it could be here. You see, enemies that are stasis will just despawn after a few seconds, which at first sounds okay. It means instead of Limbo being a CC frame, he can effectively kill most of the ads by just dropping a long-range stasis cataclysm. And this is sort of a viable tactic, and you might consider using it to delete crowds, but there are 2 unfortunate issues with it. Because the ads despawn, Limbo cannot just grab a bunch of enemies, CC them, and then keep them rift surged and stasised. This would theoretically prevent the game from being able to send in more ads due to hitting the enemy limit, therefore allowing Limbo to potentially lock down all ads at the start of the fight and then never have to deal with them again beyond just refreshing those 2 abilities. This is unfortunate, but still having a long-range AoE sphere of killing everything wouldn't be so bad. Except there's one type of enemy that isn't affected by this bug. Anything that can ignore stasis. And while most of those sorts of enemies will only show up when you have a high alert level and so can be easily worked around by just destroying any totems that get dropped, Terramancers spawn at any alert level and do have that wonderful stasis immunity, so by blasting everything you get rid of all mobs except for these somewhat tanky guys who can 2-shot you in a wide AoE and then have a random group of mobs, which might include another Terramancer or 2, spawn in after just a few seconds. So yeah, your CC doesn't work as well as it could, and doesn't affect an enemy who is at least as dangerous for you as the boss itself is. And there's a few other issues thanks to this bug. Since you can't CC an enemy for any time at all, you can't use Life Strike to turn them into Life Siphon, so you lose 1 durability trick. And since they just despawn rather than dying, you get no ammo from them. And finally, having to constantly drop large cataclysms or banish everything in huge areas can be very annoying for your teammates, and while this isn't something that could be completely fixed if the issue were removed, it wouldn't need to be done as often. So yeah, if this bug ever gets fixed, Limbo will become more viable here, but at the moment it really hurts him. He's still able to work as what's effectively a nuke frame in teams, but there's other Warframes that do the exact same thing without any of the negatives. And yeah, those bugs are why I left those 3 slots open on our build earlier. If you want to try and work with a buggy yet invincible Titania or Excalibur, you can easily slot in Narrow-Minded and Prime Continuity and then fill the last slot with whatever you like. And if you want to try and use Limbo as a crowd clearer, you can toss on Overextended, Stretch, and Natural Talent, and you'll have enough range and base duration to force the enemies to despawn. Otherwise, you can do what I do when soloing and just fill those leftover slots with things like Gladiator Resolve, Rage, and Lightning Dash, or other mods that help with survivability or give you some sort of personal utility. Yeah, thanks to bugs, we've got a frame that can be nuked by an ad, and who's got issues that basically hit in some way on every part of his kit except for his passive. So with all those wonderful negatives, is there anything that Limbo can actually do here? Yeah, kind of. For one, despite the danger of getting 2-shot, he really shouldn't actually be dying that much, especially in a team setting. None of the boss's actual attacks can hit him when he's in the rift, and Rolling Guard and the other mods give him plenty of time to do what damage he needs to, and then slip back into the void. And because Limbo is basically untouchable, he can go wherever he wants to without any problems, and so is a very good choice not only for reviving allies, but also for hunting down totems and killing anything dangerous that spawns. And of course, as mentioned before, he can cause all nearby mobs to despawn and sometimes allow exalted weapon users to do their thing without needing to worry about damage from the boss or ads. But yeah, he's currently got some problems. They aren't so bad that I can say you shouldn't take him here, as his ability to avoid damage makes him so hard to kill that you can comfortably solo the boss once you get used to playing around Rolling Guard and Riftwalk. And he's got some niche abilities, but it's still hard to call him anything more than slightly above average here. However, if his issues do ever get fixed, he does have some interesting potential, and hopefully DE will take the time to patch out his problems. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like and subscribe, and I will see you tomorrow. Farewell.